we spoke, I'm sure you don't remember because I think you were exhausted, and I was one of a line of about 3 or 4 million people who were about to speak to you. But it was the week of the election, and all around KL there was a real buzz about the possibility of you winning that election. Not just you, but the coalition. In your office, that buzz was enough to keep the lights on, I think. There was extraordinary energy there. And I got the sense from you, although I didn't really ask you this directly, I got the sense from you that you really believed you were going to be the Prime Minister at the end of that week. Didn't happen. You're not the Prime Minister. The government has a majority in Parliament of about 44 seats in a 222-seat Parliament. It's still a sizable majority. Did you really believe that you were ever going to win that election, given the gerrymandering that makes it so difficult, and then other election regularities that people have been speaking a lot about?
Well, we won the elections. What are you talking about? We believe we won the elections.
Yes. Yes, I say, well played, Mr. Anwar. But the Parliament says otherwise.
Yeah.
And while that's the case, I mean, that goes really to the heart of the question, doesn't it? I suppose what I'm asking in a roundabout way is it ever possible for you or your successors to win an election in Malaysia?
Right. We won popular votes and clear fraud. We have established incontrovertible evidence to support our argument. 5 days before the voting, we had this process called early voters. The booths were kept by the police. The Election Commission said you will have every right to be there to protect and guard. So after the voting, before the elections, 5 days before the election, we went and they said the Election Commission has no authority over the police stations. So you must have trust and confidence in the police force. I do. Yes, there are many good police personnel. And I had an experience to be assaulted by the chief of the police. So I do trust some of them, of course. So that was happened. Now, you take that into account. We won not only with 52, it's a clear, convincing victory. Now, but yes, we didn't have enough seats in Parliament. Is that possible? I say yes, it is possible. Because after the elections, we had a very critical decision to make. Whether to go on fight and go to the streets, or continue the protests but more guarded and not to allow for this direct confrontation. I chose the second. Many of the young supporters were very angry with me, but I said, look at what happened in Thailand in the last few years, look at Egypt, look at many of these countries. So we should not sacrifice lives and people's security. I'm optimistic that things will change, not in the next 4 years. Now the situation is very volatile. The government knows that they don't have the majority. They resort to this racistness. How long can they survive? There's no decision, major policy decision. It just dragged along. Now the ruling party elections is being held, very fractious, very rancorous exchanges, and we'll see what happens next. But can it happen under a democratic process or electoral process? My dream was, you remember when I mentioned it to you, is that this is the best chance to prove that you can have a peaceful transition through the ballot box. I didn't quite succeed, in becoming Prime Minister. But I was successful thanks to the people, the Malaysians, and particularly among the young, that chose the ballot box and showed and proved to the government we had the majority. LDP in Japan, the Congress Party in India, Golkar in Indonesia, we have seen these all parties defeated in the elections. And there's no reason why this cannot happen in Malaysia. We need the courage of hope and to make it work and happen and save the country from racism and corruption.
I appreciate your optimism. I have to say, it seems to me, though, like you've tried just about everything. And, I mean, there was the famous episode, the September 16, 2008 episode, which I know your critics raise a lot. And so the idea here was that rather than going to an election and winning an election, you tried to bring down the government by effectively converting government MPs to your side, and then you could bring a no-confidence motion in the Parliament and then win that way. Which a lot of Australians actually might find oddly familiar given the recent minority government. But this was the idea, and a lot of your critics say this was a way of trying to subvert the democratic will and so on. But the fact that you tried something like that, doesn't that suggest that actually there is a limit to your optimism, that you feel there is a need to try those things because the electoral system is ultimately stacked?
No, because that was the time while it was at the essence. Now, for example, the MPs of Sabah and Sarawak are disgusted with this decision.
Which decision?
This on Allah issue, for example, the discrimination, the various decision of race and religion, for that matter, and the promise to develop Sabah and Sarawak has not been working. Now, why did I choose to have this faster pace? Because that's the only way we can ensure electoral reform prior to proper elections. It's not a matter of taking over the government and staying on for the full term. I don't believe that will happen. I mean, many of my colleagues within the coalition understand precisely. Had we been successful in getting MPs, the government MPs, to support us at that time, and formed the government, the mandate was clear. Revamp the electoral process, meaning electoral reform, have an effective anti-corruption commission, and have a new elections over 3 to 6 months time frame. And this was the decision of the ruling coalition. It didn't happen, of course, and we went through the elections in 2013 in May, and we were very confident. Rightly so. To the extent that I said, if we could not make it and lose, I would retire back as a professor in the universities. And they ask me now, why haven't you retired? I say, we won. I mean, that's the point. I mean, that is why the president of Indonesia, who've been in the past, like the Australian Prime Minister met me, very careful to, not to and not antagonize or cause complications in the relations with Malaysian government. Have allowed me to meet others from vice president onwards, but not the president. But after the last elections, President S.B. Yudhoyono invited me for a private meeting for 1.5 hours just to understand the fraud, the extent of the fraud in Malaysia. Although, I mean, he's refrained from issuing statements, but I think as a Democrat, he's one way up as compared to the ruling parties or government in Australia. Pardon my saying so. At least he gives a clear indication, look, there's not much I can do as a neighboring country, but at least I want to express my concern and at least give you a hearing to say, look, I understand what's happening, and that's important, Waleed, for countries. I mean, the media here has been very supportive. I can't complain more. But then all these countries talking about promoting democracy, are completely muted. Make clear fraud. And you know that. And then, what is, you expect us to go and fight in the streets and 300 killed, then only you have to raise a voice? We don't need to do that. And I think we have chosen not to allow that to happen at a high cost, mind you. So I hope, and I'm still optimistic.
I think you're talking about Australia just a little bit there. And I know you were very critical of then Foreign Minister Bob Carr and his refusal to get involved in the Malaysian elections at all in any kind of oversight capacity. Of course, we've had a change of government since, and I wouldn't describe the new government as more confrontational towards Malaysia. In fact, Tony Abbott, the new Prime Minister, recently offered Prime Minister Najib an act of contrition. Act was unspecified, but the contrition, I suppose, was specified, about the way that Australian politicians, and I think he partly means himself, were talking about Malaysia in the context of asylum seeker policy. I mean, how does Australia look to you when you see those responses before an election and then after an election?
The people or the government? With the people, they're very kind. Look at them. Anyway, I go yesterday, I was with Senator Nick in the streets, and people greeted me in the streets, say, look, we are with you, we pray for you, congratulations. That is the sentiment of the people. Well, not necessarily the top businessmen or politicians. Doesn't make a difference anyway. But what I'm stating, and I think I need to state, is a consistent, coherent voice for democracy and freedom. Enough of this ambivalence. You're supporting dictators on one hand, preaching democracy in the other. I see. So I state this stand. I'm not here to come and create problems or trying to antagonize the Australian government. I think it is expected people like me express my views. After all, I represent the majority of Malaysians. And majority of Malaysians feel sometimes disgusted at the fact that they are being treated and the extent of either ignorance or ambivalence or hypocrisy in diplomatic nuances. You have a Prime Minister of Australia coming to Malaysia. Thank you. Phew, what a great democracy. What moderate Islam. This is an exemplar par excellence. I mean, what is she talking about?
Can I ask what you would like the Australian government, at whatever moment in time, to do? Do you want them to stand up and lecture the Malaysian Prime Minister about the state of...
Or call them recalcitrant? No.
Well...
No. There's an episode in the past. No. Have and promote excellent bilateral relations. Trade, education, culture. I'm all for it. I don't believe the position on one or two issues should deter us from having that focus. That I'm supportive. But must you be completely silent and sacrifice the ideals that you stand for? Of freedom, democracy, that you cherish. Why this contradiction? That's all. So you can do it in very polite diplomatic language or in private, whatever. That's the decision of a particular government. But to come to say the opposite, I mean, how do you expect the Malaysians to listen? After all these decisions, and you come, brilliant, excellent democracy. I mean, you just clear fraud and the good governance and tolerant regime. Moderate Islam. Why? What's so moderate Islam when a government is repressive? A government deny basic rights of people. Racist in the rhetoric or language or pronouncements. I mean, to me, it's an insult to Islam. If you come praising all these injustices and say, good, moderate Muslims. You know, I was in Rome. This very senior government personnel spoke and was supporting the coup in Egypt because Morsi was incompetent, as alleged. And because the prejudice and Islamophobia against anything Islam, or the Brotherhood, of course. I said, look, fair. I'm not disputing the fact some probably faults of Morsi, but he was democratically elected. But see, but he's incompetent. There's every reason we need to change through coup d'etat. So I asked then, what about Berlusconi? You have all these problems. Do you support a coup d'etat in Italy? You say, of course no. Then support new elections in Italy. Similarly, support new elections in Egypt. Don't treat the Egyptians as Muslims as second-class human beings that can be treated differently. You have a corrupt, incompetent, say, government in Australia. What do? You then defeat them in the next elections. You don't say, no, because of the extent corruption is intolerable, we must have a coup d'etat in Australia. So you see, the language of discourse sometimes dictated out of prejudice or Islamophobia, and that is unacceptable. You believe in democracy, in democratic process, and remain consistent. I mean, similarly here. Of course, it's not to the extent. I'm not saying Prime Minister Najib is General Sisi. No, he's much better, I can assure you. But there are excesses, and this needs to be corrected.
Perhaps Silvio Berlusconi just had better parties than Mohamed Morsi.